Dragon's Dogma 2 is finally here, but there is a whole lot you need to get your head around if you're going to get the most out of exploring Vermund and Battahl. And if you're new to the series, or haven't played it since the original came out back in 2012, it can feel a little overwhelming when you're thrown in at the deep end after the opening cutscenes play out. But fear not, dear Arisen, because I'm here to give you everything you need to know to get your journey started right. So let's get into the ultimate beginner's guide to Dragon's Dogma 2. I'll kick things off with vocations. If you haven't played Dragon's Dogma before, the name might seem a bit confusing, but essentially these are the classes that you and your pawns, we'll get to those later, can be, and is the source for your weapons, abilities, and all-round function in combat and while exploring the open world. You'll get 4 to choose from when you first get started: Fighter, Mage, Archer, and Thief, and while which one you choose should really come down to personal preference, if you're looking for a recommendation, you can't really go wrong with Thief. The Thief gives you a fantastic combination of speed and damage, letting you overpower any initial threats by avoiding them almost entirely. It's also the best vocation for climbing onto enemies, one of Dragon's Dogma 2's most potent battle tactics, and an essential skill to learn if you want to take down any of the biggest monsters in the game. The Thief also comes ready-made with the vocation special skill Swift Step baked in, which in short is basically the only way to dodge roll in the game, which makes the class even better for any players that are used to the more Souls-like combat systems. Now alternatively you could go with the Fighter. It's probably the safest option out of the 4 starting vocations and the easiest to pick up and play if you're unsure of how all this is going to work. The typical sword and shield combination is extremely familiar, and a shield does at least give you the means to avoid damage and even parry attacks if you're skilled enough. Your vocation isn't something you really have to worry about being stuck as forever either. You can change your vocation by heading to any of the vocation guilds located in many of the game's major cities and towns, but you will need to spend discipline points to unlock a new vocation for the first time. There are an additional 6 that you can unlock as you progress through the game. Some are unlocked directly through quests, often tied to the vocation guilds, but others are just found naturally throughout the world on your travels. It's not even guaranteed that you'll unlock any of the additional vocations if you don't actually seek them out, and you could go the entire game with just the 4 standard options at your disposal, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but keep a weather eye out while you're out exploring with your pawns. Speaking of which, what are they and how do they work? The pawn system is one of Dragon's Dogma 2's most unique features, and the party you create during your journey can be completely unique to your playthrough. You'll be able to design your own permanent pawn right at the start of the game who will be your doting companion throughout. But you can hire up to 2 more. Hiring pawns in Dragon's Dogma 2 is pretty simple. You just need to talk to them as you explore and request that they join your party, or search for them in Riftstones. Most pawns will just be wandering around the world and will almost always jump at the chance to join up with your Arisen. They're kind of made that way. But if you're looking for specific types of pawns, you can use Riftstones, which will allow you to hire available pawns provided you have the appropriate amount of RC to do so. RC is the currency the game uses to limit how powerful your hired pawns can be. The cost increases the further away you get from your current Arisen's level. And speaking of levels, when you acquire your primary pawn, they will level up alongside you as you take on combat encounters, complete quests, and forage for food. The pawns you hire from Riftstones, however, will not level up, so as you progress, chopping and changing the pawns you have and which vocations they specialise in becomes pivotal when taking on new challenges. They'll spot nearby chests, comment on points of interest, and even take the lead on some quests that have been completed in their original worlds, making it feel like you're actually discovering the world with other players in tow. Now, in terms of what vocations are best for your pawn, especially your primary, initially I think the Mage is probably your best bet. It provides a source of healing for you immediately, which is never a bad thing to have, and while this vocation does have low health, meaning you might end up having to revive your pawn a fair amount, it's the perfect support and will be a boon to any adventurer on their travels. I would personally recommend switching over to the Warrior vocation once you've obtained it though, since it gives your pawn the greatest amount of health it can get and grants them incredibly strong attacks that can help knock down the toughest of foes. So, you have your party, you're enjoying yourself, and then tragedy strikes. One of your party members goes down. Or even worse, a wayward attack has wiped out an important NPC and now your playthrough is ruined. With just 1 save slot and the potential to kill any NPC by accident, figuring out how to revive in Dragon's Dogma 2 is essential. Now the unfortunate bit is that this is done through a very limited resource in the game, so you'll have to pick and choose who's worthy enough to bring back to life. But there are some things you can do to prevent the death of your pawns, specifically letting you save your precious items for later on. When one of your pawns gets backhanded in a fight and their health reaches 0, they'll enter a downed state. And all you need to do to bring them back to life again is head over to them and hold the prompted button. It's not quite that simple though, because there is a timer for this, so make sure you don't leave them down for too long, otherwise they'll die for real. If that does happen, you can head to the nearest Riftstone or Pawns Guild to rejoin with your own main pawn, but any hired pawns will have to be rehired or replaced. On top of that, any pawns that die from significant fall damage or are engulfed by water cannot be revived, so make sure you're careful around that kind of environmental hazard. Your Arisen also works slightly differently. Having all of your health depleted in Dragon's Dogma 2 will lead to a game over, but you can use a Wake Stone to revive yourself and restore your health and stamina back to full. Wake Stones are formed once you collect 3 Wake Stone shards, and a prompt will pop up upon death asking if you want to use one to bring yourself back to life. Which leads us to NPCs, who are also a little bit different. Basically, every character in the game can be killed, and reviving them requires the use of a Wake Stone. If you're near the NPC where they have just died, you can revive the body directly, but if you leave it a while, they'll be taken to the nearest morgue or charnel house where they'll sit for a couple of days before they disappear forever. You can spend gold to identify their coffin at a charnel house, but you'll still need to use a Wake Stone to bring them back to life. I had to do this for one of the early side quests where an NPC was leading me to his brother in a forest. I got into a bit of a skirmish and then wondered where the hell they'd gone, only to find they seemed to have fallen off a cliff and died. And it was only when I went into a charnel house that I realised this and revived them to complete the quest. Now, Wakestone shards can be found in various chests as you explore the open world, but you'll also typically find 1 or 2 inside a charnel house, which is particularly handy when you're short. Generally, you'll probably find enough to keep you going during your playthrough, but if you're particularly chaotic with your attacks, or find yourself dying a lot, you might need to seek out a few more. So, while bringing people back from the dead is easy enough in Dragon's Dogma 2, fast travel is something you're going to have to get used to not having, at least not at your convenience. With an open world as big as this one, I don't blame you for wanting to hop from place to place, but there are plenty of treasures to find on your travels, from Seeker's tokens to new weapons, and new side quests pull you in basically every direction you go. But when you really do need to get a move on, fast travel is kind of there. You'll just need to think about whether the journey is worth the cost. You see, you can only teleport to port crystals that you've already activated, and you'll need to use a ferry stone from your inventory to do so. Port crystals are purple glowing rocks found in many of the game's main towns and cities that become activated once you find and interact with them. As a side note, you should always be on the lookout for one when you're walking around a hub area, because they'll definitely come in handy later on when you don't fancy trekking across the entire map. You can also eventually place up to 10 of your own port crystals at locations where you want them, giving you a greater level of freedom when it comes to fast travel, but you'll largely be restricted to the predetermined options at the beginning of your journey. And remember, they'll still cost you a ferry stone to travel. Now, these can be found as loot in chests as you travel throughout the world, but they're a lot rarer than you might think or want them to be. So ideally, don't go wasting them on trips that could easily be walked instead. Alternatively, one mostly unlimited form of fast travel is the ox carts that you'll find in all of the towns, cities, and even villages across the world. The caveat here is that they only travel from one predetermined static location to another, and they do cost money to use, albeit only around 100 gold. One of the benefits is you can doze off in order to skip the long journey, but do be warned, you can be rudely awakened by dangers along the way too. So 1 minute you're on an ox cart sleeping soundly, and now you're in the middle of a fight with nowhere to go. So here's a few tips on combat in Dragon's Dogma 2, specifically on dodging and locking on. It's easy to take for granted the classic action RPG combat we've gotten used to over the years. Dodging and locking onto enemies is almost expected nowadays, but Dragon's Dogma 2 throws a spanner in the works which might cause some confusion if you're new to the series. Much like Dragon's Dogma 1, there is no dedicated dodge roll action in Dragon's Dogma 2, so figuring out your positioning in anticipation of enemy attacks is more important than ever. There are a number of ways you can avoid damage, but none of them are as reliable as a good old-fashioned forward roll. The Thief vocation has the special ability Swift Step, which I mentioned earlier, and is akin to the dodge you'd find in a game like Bloodborne. But as far as I can tell, this also doesn't have any of the invincibility frames of its Souls counterparts, so you still do need to be careful. One thing I did find myself doing quite a lot was running away from the action by using the dash ability. You're still vulnerable to any damage, but it gives you a quick way to disengage from a fight if you see a big attack on the way. Super helpful when fighting bigger threats like the Cyclops, Ogre, or the Minotaur. So while there are a few ways to dodge in Dragon's Dogma 2, there is fundamentally no way to lock onto enemies. I won't lie, this took a little while to get used to after playing so many games with camera lock functions, but it means you have to really think about where you're looking and standing before you attack. I did find that there was a little bit of help when you're within a certain range of an enemy, and they also seem to have quite generous hitboxes, so you're not going to find yourself missing by margins too often, and it certainly never felt that frustrating, especially after a bit of practice. There are a few ways to get around it. You can play as the Archer vocation, as its standard attacks will always lock onto the nearest enemy in your field of vision, and this is also technically true for the magic, magic archer and many of the magic-based vocations, which give you the chance to lock onto enemies in your vision when using certain abilities, but it's the closest the game ever gets to aiming for you. Alright, we're almost there. I've just got one final tip for you to get you started on your journey into Dragon's Dogma 2, and that's how to increase carry weight. Like all action RPGs before it, Dragon's Dogma 2 has a boatload of items you can pick up, from weapons and shields to elixir components and just straight up stakes. You know, a lot of stuff you'll never likely use but are saving for a rainy day. And it's quite easy to find yourself carrying a little too much. And while your pawns can carry stuff for you, if they die with that stuff in their inventory, it goes with them. So using them as pack mules isn't a great strategy either. Now, there are several ways to increase your carry weight in Dragon's Dogma 2, from using rings that will make you stronger to consuming golden trove beetles, the latter of which is the most reliable option in the game. By consuming a golden trove beetle, you'll gain 0.15 kg of carry weight, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up fast. Golden trove beetles can be found in all kinds of weird and wonderful places, including on trees, like the beetles in Animal Crossing, or just snooping around on the ground. During my playthrough, I even found one being pecked at by harpies, so you need to keep a weather eye out for the tiny strength boosters. I could honestly keep going on and on with stuff that beginners need to know in Dragon's Dogma 2. How to cook and the best ingredients to cook with, Seeker coins and why they're so important. But honestly, the best advice I can give you as a beginner Dragon's Dogma 2 player is explore. The game does everything it can to pull you into its many caves, side quests, and monster lairs, and the only way for an Arisen to truly learn how it all works is to get out there and do it. Thanks as always for watching. Let us know down in the comments if you have any other tips and tricks beginners should absolutely know. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more Dragon's Dogma 2 guides like this, because we have plenty on the way. And while you're with us at GG Recon, YouTube has carefully selected the perfect video for you, so why not check that out here.